So you are a sophrologist, and my first question for you is, what is sophrology?
Well, let's get the hardest question out of the way because, of course, if you're in Europe, Emily, you will be familiar with the technique. The method has been around since the 1950s and is actually available with many GPs on prescription. Sophrology is a mind body technique that is used across Europe for many different things. It's used in childbirth preparation, it's used in sports, anxiety, sleep, and performance. And it's a beautiful method that combines three main disciplines: gentle body movement, meditation, visualization, and breathing.
Amazing, very concise. I love the 3 points as well. So I'm going to firstly touch on exercise because you yourself are very active. You love exercise, you believe in exercise, and there's a huge link between positivity, a positive mental attitude, and positive mental health and exercise. What's your view on that? What is the link? Why does exercise make us feel better? Where is that positive cycle coming from?
Oh my gosh, that's an enormous question to answer. And I'll go slowly and cautiously because um, why does it make us feel better? Well, let's start by the fact that when we move our bodies, our system becomes active. And a lot of us are now in desk based jobs. We're using our very clever brains a lot of the time and often leaving our bodies behind. Our body becomes a bit of an accessory. And we weren't designed that way. We were designed to be united mind and body together, mind in connection with the body, body connection with the mind. So, of course, as soon as we move our body, we begin to integrate ourselves as a whole being. Now, there are a million other reasons why exercise is going to make people feel better, not just that connection. Of course, if you're outside, you've got the benefits of fresh air, sunlight, and movement just stimulating the body, increasing blood flow, helping your body do all the things it should be doing. You know yourself, your digestion's better if you're moving. You sit down, have a massive meal, slump on the sofa, everything goes slow. You're not going to feel great. So to rush through that, and I can expand if you'd like me to, move in any way possible because it's just the way that you were designed to be.
So we kind of understand that exercise is good. It's very much told exercise is good, try and do that, try and do movement. And I think a lot of people who will be tuning in are likely to be active people based on the sort of content that is available here. So my question then is, where is the line between exercising actually becoming that unhealthy obsession and almost out exercising yourself to deal with your emotions and kind of running away from it? Do you know what I mean? That kind of line where you're actually not dealing with things and it becomes a kind of net negative effect rather than positive.
I love that you've asked me that because you have a little insight into some of the kinds of clients I deal with. Um, Running away, one of the pillars that I work with people obviously is exercise, but also recovery and relaxation. And many people say to me, "Well, Lindsay, actually, I get very relaxed when I go for a run." I say, "That's great. I'm sure you find it very relaxing, but the reality is, your body can't move into rest and digest. It cannot access the parasympathetic nervous system when you're running. It simply can't. Your system doesn't work like that. So, in order to really relax and recover, we need to be in a state where our nervous system is in rest and digest, and that is not exercising. So, if we're exercising constantly, and I think you know that I'm a big fan of health data, the Whoop tracker, and I love asking people about their heart rate variability. That's an indicator, if it's very, very low, that your nervous system is permanently locked in either fight or flight, or in the case of depressive behavior, really stuck in that just flat rest and digest spot. And over exercising is obviously a very personal, very triggering conversation. It's one I have to have, sadly, quite often, because when I say to people, "So you exercise?" and they say, "Oh yes, I'm training for Ironman, or I'm a road cyclist, or I'm a downhill mountain biker, or I'm doing this, I'm doing that." And then I say, "What do you do to relax? How do you recover?" And then I see their stress scores if I'm tracking them, and I can see that they appear to have no rest days at all. A rest day isn't a 10K run. "Oh, I just did a quick 10K hike." That's not resting.
So why should people care about that? How can they identify perhaps if they are over exercising? Because you're not saying that exercise is bad. In fact, you're saying exercise is really good. But how can someone who perhaps isn't identifying these signs firstly identify perhaps actually I'm in danger of out exercising my emotions? And also, why should they care about it?
Well, there's two parts to that question really. If somebody has no physical symptoms and they're training and they're winning marathons or whatever they're doing, and then I say I think you're over exercising, of course they say, well, that's an absolute load of rubbish, Lindsay. I'm not really interested in what you're saying. That's a very difficult conversation because where are the markers that are indicating that they're over exercising? When they turn up and they say, I'm really having trouble sleeping, or feeling like I'm really struggling to manage my emotions in terms of anger, which is very common in men, or I'm really finding that my energy levels are being zapped, and they're perhaps in that sort of menopausal category. Obviously, we can then dig into that over exercising and start talking about maybe you need to back off a bit. There's a sweet spot, and there are thousands of podcasts out there around non-functional overreaching. And I'm not an exercise professional. My profession is obviously behaviour change, data-driven behaviour change, using the method of sophrology. But people that are really pushing too hard can often feel it. It often comes out in the body. We also see people turning up with inflammatory conditions, so arthritis, and inflammation in the body, which can be very much exacerbated by the fact that you're in this fight or flight, that you're running with some of these stress hormones, and they can become very toxic in the body and create a lot of inflammation. So, those are some of the things that I look for. Of course, if we're tracking somebody with a wearable data tracker, we can see that they get up in the morning, the alarm goes off, bang, they shoot out of bed. They stay up there all day on their stress monitor or whatever we're looking at, and then they go back to bed. And if they're a good sleeper, back to sleep, hopefully stay asleep, but then it happens all over again. That's pretty perhaps being a little bit too active.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the word here is stress because a lot of the exercise it puts stress on your body. And then there's actually like palatable stress of stressful environments and stressful situations, which is kind of mental stress rather than just physical. And then you mentioned there the importance of sleep and how that all links up. And it kind of encompasses this huge kind of perception of health. What is your exercise? What is your emotional and mental state? And then the sleep, which is the restorative cycle within that.
Yes.
How can someone even approach that sort of balance of health? Because it seems massively overwhelming when we kind of put it like that. Because how can I sort my sleep out when I'm already stressed, but then I'm stressed because I'm really tired, so I can't sort my exercise out because I'm not energized enough to do that. And it kind of becomes it can become a positive cycle, but it also can become a very vicious cycle. What's your views on that? Because I'm sure a lot of the people who you've dealt with as well are kind of in this vicious cycle of, oh my goodness, I don't know how to crack into one, which kind of helps the other. Because if you're well rested, you're more likely to be less stressed. So you're more likely to have capacity to do more exercise. And it's very positive. But how do you kind of break into that?
This is a really tricky area, and I've been in the clinic today, and the conversations I've been having with people around this is really about freedom versus control. And it's about finding that balance. We are unique but united in our interests talking about this area of exercise. We are exercise people ourselves. We're very, very unique. Our bodies are very different. We're designed in very different ways. The point really here is feeling what's right for you. The problem there is in the word feeling. And you asked me earlier about what's the problem with emotions and over exercising. Well, the problem that we see already at the beginning of these conversations with clients is they can't feel anything. They're numb. They're using their thinking head, they're using their clever brain, but in terms of wisdom, intuition, body sensations, and emotions, that they're numb from the neck down. And we see this a lot in addiction, whether it's addictive behavior with exercise, whether it's alcohol addiction, whether it's food issues. We've got this numbing, and people are looking for a sensation because they can't feel anything. Well, they can't feel anything because they've turned their body off, which allows them to push themselves harder. And there you are now stuck further down the line, can't feel anything. Well, do you really care? And that's the million dollar question. If you don't care, it's quite hard. You can't feel it anyway, and it's not creating you any other problems. Um, but yeah, freedom, control, and doing what's right for you, Emily. They're the keys here.
And that really like links very nicely onto burnout, because that's another thing that you talk a lot about is burnout. And I think burnout can kind of come from lots of different ways. It can be doing the same thing for a long time. It can be doing a lot of things for a long time and feeling overwhelmed. So it kind of has these two kind of extremities on either side, but equally it can be anywhere in the middle. So a lot of people can experience burnout in a lot of different ways. And I think that when you kind of talk about burnout, everyone it kind of knows what it is, but almost it creeps up on you and you don't realize it until it's that little bit too late. So what's your definition of burnout? How can you identify burnout in people and how can they identify it in themselves?
Well, when I'm talking about burnout, and it's a much used phrase at the moment, we're really looking at mental, physical, and emotional exhaustion. True burnout in clients, they can't even get off the sofa, but there's no real cause for this absolute fatigue. And this is not the same as chronic fatigue, but that lack of interest and engagement, lack of energy, lack of enthusiasm across those three pillars, physical, mental, and emotional, we become burnt out, depleted in those areas. And when we begin to see people say, that is how I feel, Lindsey. I've just got no joy. That there's really nothing left here. I'm just grinding through. I'm barely surviving. It's the classic surviving and not thriving. And there are different levels and different extents of being burnt out. But we do see it. And I think people tend to then try and overcompensate. They ignore it. They use different tactics. They might be using food, as I said. They might be really pushing through with exercise. But, they're pushing so hard to achieve what they were perhaps achieving more easily a year ago, 2 years ago. So yeah, burnout, Emily, it's a really interesting thing. I do talk about it because it's such a. I don't want to using the word shame is always difficult, but in the workplace, we're hearing people talk about it, and then there's a sort of blame shifting. Well, it's my employer's fault. They did this to me, or it was COVID, and there's also quite a lot of PTSD wrapped up in a lot of these things. Often, which is quite complicated psychologically. And as I said, my job is to work with people on behaviour change, physically, mentally, and emotionally, and that's really where we do see great results with burnout. Going at your own pace, using effort tracking, so we're talking about effort, not outcome. We're not building these horrible to-do lists, and the work I do, as you know, begins with this big piece at the beginning of pause, presence, power, people, purpose, plans. And that's the way I run normally my sessions and my interventions with people and with organizations. We have to stop. And then we become present. And then we can begin to sense again.
Which I guess is why it's so challenging, because the thought of stopping probably causes a lot of people, especially if they are in that burnout phase, which may suggest that they don't really have the feeling of where it is from, like the source of it. Or they might be in that completely overwhelmed phase to then say, okay, we're just going to stop. Suddenly that's kind of alarm bells ringing. So that's, I guess, why, you come in and you can kind of guide them along that side. But when you say, it's very much based along behavioral change, it's quite a daunting thing, that, because it's very much the core of each person, and therefore it's probably the cause of the people who come and see you and talk to you. Obviously, they're wanting to be there to improve themselves in whatever way it is. So it's not an easy task to do. Can you kind of talk me through this behavioral psychology, how you kind of approach it and break it down into, I guess, a bit more understanding for people who are listening and perhaps think it's quite overwhelming but want to know more?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because often we go down the medical route of that. I've got this problem. I want a tablet to fix it. I've got anxiety. Can you give me something? I can't sleep. Can you give me something? And when I say this is about changing your behavior, often I get the eye rolling. Oh, sounds too hard. Is there not a supplement that can do this? Is there a device? And me, Emily, I've tried everything. I buy everything on the market. I'm like the human laboratory. I've always got some gadget and gizmo going on somewhere. But the reality is when we're using sophrology for behavior change, we always start by asking, how do you feel? And sophrology isn't a reflective therapeutic intervention. We're going over people's past. We're asking you to really do what we call a phenodescription in part of the process, where we're asking you, what did you notice? What's coming up for you? What are you sensing? And we're really asking people to come back into their body and become aware of, oh, look, if you rub your hands together, there's heat. Wow. How does that feel? Oh, tingly. Great, you felt something. It's that simple. So then we can start beginning to go a bit deeper. And where is that feeling of perhaps anger? Where is it in the body? What's happening? When's it happening? Okay, great. How do you want to feel? So, in a nutshell, we're trying to become aware of what's happening. We're becoming conscious. And sophrology really is about consciousness. You will have read about flow state thinking, altered states of consciousness using psychedelics, all these things that are in vogue now. And it's mushroom season, allegedly, at the moment in the Alps. So if you fancy some magic mushrooms, apparently they are wildly and freely available. But these are about altering our states of consciousness in the same way we use alcohol. We're looking to change our behavior. Sophrology is doing that by becoming aware and then becoming very intentional. Okay, how do you want to feel in these situations? Which is where we then use visualizations. We're using the breath work and the gentle body movement to become aware. Then we're using the visualization and the guided meditation to start stepping into what it is we want. And there's also a beautiful part of astrology where we can go back into the past and collect, for example, capacities and values from the past and then bring them forwards. We do event preparation, we do planning, we start thinking, okay, when I turn up in that situation that I find very triggering, how do I want to feel? What do I want to happen? How do we visualize that? How do we feel what it's going to be like? And we're creating those, priming those neural pathways. So when we get there, the body goes, oh, I've done this before. Like a sport, any sports race, Emily, you've raced, if you visualize the course, whatever discipline you're in, you're visualizing the corner. Which angle am I coming in at? Which angle am I coming out at? How am I going to feel when I get there? It's very much that practical process, but in terms of thoughts, feelings, and emotions, coding in words, actions, and behaviors.
It's very interesting because, you mention alcohol, like mushrooms, whatever it is that can float your boat. It's like these quick fix kind of shiny objects of I'm going to try and do this and it's going to make me feel better. Whereas the approach here is slower, probably, less sexy, less flashy, less exciting because it is sustainable and it's going to work and probably fix you in a lot more healthy, natural way, which is the little asterisks of the terms and conditions. But it's interesting. I just kind of feel like how you talk about it, it's grounding. It brings you back down to earth. Your feet are on the ground. You are feeling like the air on your face, the wind in your hair. You're feeling that kind of who you are, The simple things of rubbing your hands together and it feels warm. Like, wow, okay. It's interesting how simple it can be in that sense. And then the power of the mind is something that I find really fascinating because as we kind of touched on, it can be really positive or it can be really negative, or it can kind of just be a bit empty, I guess, when it's the feeling sense of it as well. And the visualization element of not only are you visualizing how it's going to go in the best case scenario, but also the worst case scenario or an okay scenario and dealing with it kind of in that way, whether it's future events or past events, and the processing sense of things as well, because our brain has to process a lot of these things or it just kind of ends up stored up like a really full iPhone storage and then it goes very slow and clunky. And I was speaking to a girl who had completed the Pacific Crest Trail, which is 2,650 miles. She did it in 147 days, which is a lot of miles a day. And she said, I'm kind of processing it all in retrospect because at the time I got up, I hiked for 12 hours and then I camped. And you don't really have the time to process all of these things. So working through someone else's mind and mental storage and a lot of mental baggage as well, because it's not always these lovely, positive, happy clappy cases, unfortunately, that you get to work with. How does that mental baggage kind of work in your own life? Because I feel like it's quite a heavy task to approach and leave your work kind of at the door in that way, because being a lovely person like you are, you become quite invested in people's lives and you have that caring, compassionate element of your personality, which enables you then to be more endearing to your clients. But how do you kind of have that barrier in, okay, this is actually where I need to leave this, and I've done what I can, and I will see you next session.
Well, of course, professionally, Emily, I need to tell you that, of course, I have a barrier and I'm very professional and my terms and conditions are in line with the ISF, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, I have adequate supervision for myself. But of course, it's incredibly difficult when you're a people person and, like you, deeply caring about people's, um, I suppose, people's minds, bodies, and emotions. And the work is challenging but worth it. You only go as deep as the person can go. You only go as fast as your client can go. So often you're just allowing them to unfold it at their own pace, and that's very comforting them because it's not my responsibility. I'm just here with the method, and we often say in sophrology the method is like we're not cleaning the water, we're just strengthening the glass. We're just building this resilient glass and then letting it settle. I'm not the savior of the world. Of course, we know that we leave that, depending on your spiritual beliefs, to other icons or images. But my job is literally just to be present and bring the method that was developed in the 1950s into awareness. And I'm passionate about this in the English speaking world because I think it's a brilliant method that's very, very effective. But it requires people to take responsibility for themselves. And I think that's the most frustrating thing when you're working with a client who I know really, really wants this, but for some reason just can't get there. But of course, there's a judgment in that as well, because along the way, of course, they're making progress. So the fact that they've even come into the room or they've come to a corporate session or they've turned up at a workshop or they've dialed into a retreat, they're coming out different than they came in. And for some people, that's enough. But yeah, challenging, really challenging. And I think we learn. I don't want to be hard-hearted. There's a beautiful book by Michael Singer, Being Open-Hearted. I want to be an open-hearted and warm and loving person. I don't want to be battered by this experience. But, getting to share these sorts of things with you, it's just spreading the message and allowing people to see, okay, this is a method that they can use. And then they've really got to have that personal agency that goes with it.
Yeah, it's a lovely combination of here's the guidelines, here's the understanding of how your brain works, why these emotions are flagging these feelings, and then kind of direction, but also responsibility, because I think that's a lot of the longevity of it, which perhaps is where a lot of people might fall off the path of it because it's hard, because taking responsibility in that sense is really difficult. But no, it's really interesting that's kind of the approach for it. And overall, it's quite a broad question, but what's probably the most common symptom that you see people, your clients, people you've worked with have? What's the most common kind of thing that you would say is a starting point to work on?
I think people come through the door saying they're worried about sleep and energy levels. So, especially because of the type of client I attract, they're normally pretty fit and active, similar sort of age. And I seem to have an awful lot of men. We've laughed about this before. Men love a piece of tech. They love the fact that I do what I call data-driven behavior change. They love a number. So if they've got a Whoop band and I tell them, especially if I spot them with one on and I tell them what they do, invariably they then come and see me because they want to know how to hack their data and beat their mates and be the best they can be. But sleep and energy are the things that people come through the door with. Of course, then when we're in that dialogue, especially in a one-to-one setup, we uncover a lot of other challenges. Let's say nobody's perfect, and yourself, it's a balance. You've got to get your nutrition and hydration has to be right, your sleep has to be in the right place, you've got to get your exercise, your relaxation and your recovery right, and you've got to have some kind of sense of purpose, because when we lose one of those pillars of well-being, we're off balance. We haven't got those firm foundations. We are building a life on sand. It's just not sustainable. But you can't let holes. You can't allow holes to form in those foundations. If you've had a particularly stormy winter, you got to get the concrete out and do a bit of groundwork again.
Yeah, it's all about the foundations, exactly. And what are the pillars of wellness that you would define for people to identify in their lives?
Pillars of well-being are the ones I always start with. So we have nutrition and hydration. Great to be eating, but you're necking 3 bottles of wine a night or not drinking any water. We need to look at both of those. Exercise, of course, super important. Got to be right for you. If you've got a terribly bad back and you're perhaps struggling with your weight, I'm not going to suddenly say start taking up marathon running. I'm going to start saying, can you please walk, or perhaps go and do some gentle stretching. Sleep, of course, we've talked about it a lot. Relaxation and recovery, two slightly different things, and purpose. They are the 5 pillars of well-being that we have to have in place, and then we move into those building blocks of transformational change.
The pillar of purpose. Can you break it down for me a little?
Can I break down my purpose in life? I mean, this is so personal, isn't it? What's your purpose?
Or the definition of it. Yeah. How can people identify their purpose?
What is your purpose? Why are you here? You're on this planet. I always say in my meditations, when we're thinking about breathing and the breath work, you come into the world with an inhale and you go out of the world on the last exhale. And what's the purpose along the way? Well, is it just to be still? Is it to be just in today? We've heard people say my body is a temple and not a playground. I hear people say, no, it's a playground. I hear people say my purpose is love and be loved. My purpose is to be rich, to be successful. It's a very difficult question and a difficult conversation. But the way we get to purpose, and it's right at the end of the process that I use with the planning piece, is we start looking at where your power is, where are your gifts and talents, what are you good at? You'll be better at things naturally than I am, just because that's the way you were made. We're very different body shapes. You run a lot quicker than I do. You're built to be a faster runner. I've got power in different places. Some of us might be more chatty than others. Others might be more reflective. Some people are better listeners. When we look at our gifts and talents, it gives us a clue as to what our purpose in life might be. Now, the problem, of course, with this work is then when we start leaning into values, capacities, gifts and talents, we can sometimes see that where people are present at the moment isn't aligned. So their purpose isn't actually aligned with who they are. Then we've got some work to do, because that's really hard.
I kind of think of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I remember looking at in school, and it's always stuck with me because you have that top of the triangle, it's always nicely laid out with different colours. I think there's 5 levels. Maybe it's the 5 pillars, to be fair. And then at the top, the self-actualization element. And if you don't have that, you may have your shelter, your food, your sleep, your safety, but you don't have that purpose. You go through the motions, you go through the movements, you feel that kind of emptiness. And I think it also accumulates over time. Where is the meaning? Where are the meaningful conversations? Where is the depth that is that connection with people, which I think in the modern world, we're really lacking that depth, that connection, that meaningful conversation. Or even, someone saying, hi, Lindsay, not just, oh, hiya, like recognizing your name, looking you in the eye. It's all of these little things that actually, without that, I'm not saying it's leading to purpose, but it's leading to feeling more human, which then leads to a bit more of a feeling that you then can go and become an amazing artist or just enjoy painting on the canvas, which will lead to then the outlet of your creative talent and your creative interests. And it doesn't always need to be talent. It's actually just passion. What are you passionate for? I think there's so much of a lacking of passion for things, and it doesn't actually have to be linked with talent or making you a complete millionaire or whatever. You can just enjoy a little watercolor in the evening. But it is that link that's so important. And it's almost, although it's the last part of this Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or the last pillar that you work towards, it's definitely not least important. You can live without it. You can exist without it, which without sleep, food, or shelter, you won't exist very long. But it's really interesting the importance of it and that it's included in the pillars. I really am very interested by that.
Yeah, somebody sent me something on effective altruism recently, and we had a really big debate about it, giving and generosity. And I was busy listening to it, and it was very, very challenging. And really talking about, saving lives, the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, food, water, and shelter. Now, they're not the clients that I've got. I'm not working in homeless shelters and prisons at the moment. Who knows where I might end up? People that are coming to see me already have everything they need, but of course, that purpose and that self actualization is missing. And then we go out searching, like you said, for passion. Okay, what am I passionate about? Well, I'm passionate about shopping and running and, things that perhaps we should be a little bit less passionate about. Drinking, smoking, partying, going to a nightclub, doing whatever. That's slightly misdirected sometimes, because what truly gives us joy and peace, and I think there's an authenticity in that, because actually what gives us a thrill or a kick isn't the same as what gives us peace and serenity. And when I say to people, what do you do and what do you love? And then I say, what gives you joy, peace, and serenity? They're very different conversations. But yeah, Maslow, I mean, what a genius. I've referred to that so many times this week already. And I do feel I agree with what you said earlier in that question, Emily. We are becoming so disconnected, so distracted, and so disappointed because we can't live up to these images that we're seeing online, that we end up in this sort of horrible place where, what do I feel? I don't know, but I know I don't feel great.
Mm-hmm.
It's not fun.
Joy, peace, and serenity. I think that those are really great places to start as well. Sitting down, what brings me these things? And it literally can be the simplest things, like my cup of tea in the morning, or, walking the dog or having a lion. It doesn't need to be great things. It can be a glass of wine. It can be, going out with my friends. It can be all of these things. It doesn't need to be, immensely healthy things. It's just kind of finding the first passion, the first kind of sparks of some sort of emotion. I think it's so rare in life to be passionate about something that when you are, like, goodness me, chase it, like, do as much as you can. And hopefully it's not going to be something that's very detrimental to you. If so, perhaps it's not going to give you the peace that you're striving for. However, it's very interesting. Yeah, people kind of are looking for that, but they don't know where to start. And I imagine when you say, what brings you joy, peace, and serenity, they kind of sit back and go, oh boy, what if I sign myself up for? Even though it's probably one of the most life-changing questions that you will ask them.
It's a really tricky one. And there's a beautiful emotional spiral. You can find it online. It's called the emotional spiral. And the midpoint from negative emotions into positive or helpful to unhelpful is serenity. And what I find people saying is, I'm bored. I'm like, are you sure you're bored? Or is that peace and serenity? Because they're quite close together in the body. And, especially if I've got, clients who are very, very outgoing or perhaps neurodivergent. Oh, it's just, I got bored, so I went and did something crazy, or, I got bored, so I did like that. You've missed the peace point there.
I've never really made that link between boredom and peace.
Mm.
That's a very interesting point. How would you define boredom?
Oof. Well, again, I think it's unique, isn't it? How much boredom can we tolerate? And what do you think is boring will be very different to what I think is boring. But that feeling of bored, unstimulated, lack of input, that's going to happen when you're in the place of peace and serenity as well. So in terms of energetic coding and frequency, the emotions are very close together if we're getting into the sort of field of quantum physics and energetics, which we could have a whole other conversation and podcast about.
Yeah, sorry everyone, this is going to be the first 6-hour podcast.
I think we
Going
might
into
have a few other things to talk about as well, Emily, but yes, of course.
Yeah, so then going on with that, what I love about the work that you do is you not only tell people kind of the facts and then how to go about it, but there's also the exercises that you talk about as well. And I remember you like drumming on about breath work. I'm like, why is she going on about breath work? Why is it important? Because obviously it is. And even if you're a fairly healthy, fit person, it still means that you need to take that step back and have breath work and stretch and enjoy a bit of quiet as well. And restoration, restoring yourself is so important, even if you want to be go, go, go. And then the breath work element really links into that. So can you kind of give a bit of an introduction into what breath work is, why we should do it, and how we should do it as well.
Yeah, if you're a social media fan and you're in the algorithm of breath work, you will have seen this um, quite rapid breathing. You might have seen Wim Hof style breathing. You might have seen this holotropic tropic breathing where you're really going for it. I'm talking about really breath awareness, although I am also a breath work uh, qualified instructor. But we're talking about just becoming aware of the breath as a way of joining the mind and the body together. The reason breathing or awareness of breath or breath work is important is because it's a subconscious process. So when you become aware of a subconscious process, you're actually altering your state of consciousness. So you're becoming conscious of something that was previously subconscious, therefore you become more conscious. Does that make sense?
It does, yes.
So
Interesting.
the access into the body in sophrology is very much through the breath. We're becoming aware of the breath, coming in, coming out. And just now, just breathe in through your nose, Emily. Notice the temperature.
Mm, it's
It's
colder.
colder, and then when it comes out, it's.
It's warmer. Oh,
Do you notice that every single time you breathe today?
no.
See, you've just altered your consciousness. So when we're in these conversations about altered states of consciousness, and where we see these again, if you're in the algorithm, you'll be seeing these weird and wonderful conversations. All we're talking about is that I just became aware of my breath. Great, you've changed your consciousness. You're becoming aware of the fact that you're breathing, and then we can access the body. What's the body doing? Okay, air's coming in. It's coming in cooler. It's going out warmer. Great. Where's it going? Oh, it's going down into my lungs. What's happening? Oh, my lungs are expanding and they're contracting. Amazing. Oh, my heart's beating. Oh, I'm alive. Brilliant. We're unwrapping the sensations of what it's like to be human and be alive. Because if you're dead, none of this would be happening. And then, of course, as we go down the line, and I had a beautiful conversation with somebody today about really facing towards being alive and being positive. We're facing towards the fact that we're alive, we're here, and we're in today. We're not facing towards I'm going to be getting older and dying, and it's all going horribly wrong. And I've recently read the Glucose Goddess new book. I don't know if you've happened to dial in, but she uses a word. She says as we age, we're cooking from the inside. We are dying from the minute we're born. And the way she says it is so funny, but it's so true. And, do you want to face towards life today, or do you want to face towards death? Well, think about your breathing and you'll feel much more alive.
It's funny, isn't it? Yeah, everyone will be able to try that exercise. And it just grounds you, the mini little miracles that go along in every part of our body and brain, and the fact that if I want to lift my arm, it's because my brain has said, okay, the right arm's going to lift, and therefore my arm obeys it in this split second, and then the reaction time and things like that. You can really break down into the psychology of it, and it's utterly mind-boggling in the sense of that, and it probably makes you further away from feeling human the deeper into the psychology that you go into it, because it's actually so immense and huge. But then leading in with the breath work as well, you also talk about stillness, which I think probably rings a few more alarm bells, because stillness, I guess, when you sit there and you're still, suddenly all of the thoughts that say you're running away from all of your thoughts, and you can imagine a picture of that, then you stop, and then all of the thoughts run up to you, and faster you've been running, the more thoughts you've been having chasing you, and therefore it can be feeling quite overwhelming when you do stop, because if you've actually not stopped for a week, 2 weeks, a month, a year, suddenly you're going to have, say, a year's worth of thoughts all crowd down on you while you're sitting there in your stillness, trying to have some time out and ground yourself to yourself. What do we think about stillness, and how can it not be so overwhelming to people in a kind of, and how can it be productive?
Well, that's a great question. And you know me, I'm so good at being still. It's a massive challenge for everybody. And we're not talking about people here who are, struggling with depression, can't get out of bed. We're talking about becoming still in that incredible busyness. Stillness is so, so important, because if you're not still, your body can't recover. And I think my incentive here is, how do I make stillness productive? Let's imagine that you're just super, super busy and your brain hasn't got time to do any filing. So it's a bit like doing your paperwork, but you don't actually bother to open the filing cabinet, old school, but you just, or like all the windows are open in your computer. everything's on your desktop, as mine normally is, nothing's been put away properly, so you can't find anything. Well, if you really want to be the best version of yourself, and you're perhaps, a high performer, you're ambitious, you've got, high goals for yourself, physically, mentally, or emotionally, career wise or otherwise, just by being still, you're allowing your mind to do the mental filing it needs to do to access intuition and move into wisdom and away from knowledge and information. And as we get older and we begin to realize there's very little more we can cram in, but what we can do is really access insight and wisdom, which is what gives us that edge. When we get there, Emily, and you're in, this is often what we call flow state. And if you research any of that, that moment, you're like, this is golden. You go out for a meditative walk or you sit and meditate over a problem, you're still, your brain makes all the connections, it does all the filing, and boom, there you go. You're a genius. So does that sound appealing?
Sounds, yeah, I think it's so important. Appealing might not be the right word. How does that actually practically look? What does stillness look like in a lifestyle?
Well, be still and know, I think, is the best thing to explain it. And when we're still, we're literally just being physically, mentally, and emotionally present. So we're stopping and pausing. And I ask people to start with 3 minutes. And it might just be 3 minutes of following the breath in, out, in, out. What's happening in your mind? Oh, it's gone for a walk. It's, doing the shopping. Bring it back in, clear it down, focus again. Can you really maintain focus for 3 minutes? I often give out 5-minute sand timers. Can you sit and watch that sand timer and know that you haven't actually been distracted by your thoughts once in 5 minutes? The answer, of course, is not. But just by being aware that you're bringing your mind back into focus is beginning that meditation and that stillness that we all desperately, desperately need. And we're so overstimulated. I mean, if you think about, when we were living in tribes and we're living in caves, we've got no electricity, there is no stimulation. We're sat around chatting, the sun goes down, we go to bed. I mean, you would never need to sleep now because you've got everything, there's so much going on and there's so much to do. And, we're just massively overwhelmed.
One thing I find really, really fascinating is the concept of seasonal depression, because it gets dark really early and it gets light really late. But really, back in the day, we would go to sleep when it got dark and we would wake up when it gets light, which means when it's better weather in the summer, we would be awake for longer because we'd be doing more work. But in the winter, we'd sleep for longer because we're tired, we're cold, and it's that level of hibernation which actually really links back to a lot of the animals who will hibernate for the winter, and we're not in full hibernation at all, but our lifestyle changes. And then actually, a lot of it is that biology of how we're made up in that sense, whether it's the tribes that you mention and therefore the close-knit connection between people around us, which if we're living in an isolated area where we don't know people around us, or we don't have that trust, we don't have that love, we don't have that family. Family can not generally just be biological family. It can be friends. It can be people who you treat as family in terms of unconditional love. And it's very interesting, that tribal aspect that we've lost, because I'm not saying we should run about with, spears or whatever and, attack other tribes. I'm saying that the concept of the unconditional love, the acts of service, the protection of others, it's elements that in modern society we're really lacking. Where does that link in with the psychology element of how we're having this negative effect of anxiety, depression, which are very much clinical issues as well? And I'm not kind of putting any of them down in their significance, but I think a lot of it is linked in with that lacking of connection in the modern world.
Absolutely. I absolutely love reading and listening to anything on evolutionary psychology and evolutionary biology. And I've got a child that horse rides, so I'm endlessly fascinated now by horses and the way their nervous system operates. We're meant to be in tribes. We're meant to be in communication and connection with people. We're meant to be united. And that's the people pillar. Who are you with? What's happening in your life? And, we are missing some of those things. You started the conversation by asking about seasonal affective disorder. Of course, we're not meant to be awake all night. When the sun goes down, you're meant to be asleep. In the winter, you're doing less than you are in the summer when the days are longer. But we're not all working in agriculture anymore, so it doesn't really apply. But if you're starting a new project and you're birthing something or you're growing something, springtime, the energy is better to do that. You've got that orientation in the seasons that helps you. The energy is right. That's how we should be doing things. But we've missed a trick here because we don't think about these things, and I think we do miss that connectivity, and we're often in competition with each other. How many likes have we got? How many followers? How much of a pay rise? Is my car better than yours? Is my house bigger? If we haven't got, we've got Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but then we're just going into the minutiae of this, and comparing. And as you know, comparison is the thief of joy.
I really enjoyed that part of the seasons analogy that you used, because in springtime, all the leaves are that beautiful bright green, which is probably one of my favorite colors because you literally just
Mm.
see it everywhere. And it's just that amazing, I don't know, it's just such a visual reminder of like the new life that is being born. There are lambs everywhere. There's a lot of new things growing after the winter. And it's funny how actually if we work with it, if we work with nature, there's actually that kind of, we're going with the momentum. People are coming out after their hibernation, because I think even in the modern world there is a sense of hibernation during winter, of cozying up, wrapping up, keeping warm. But yeah, and then people are coming out, they're more excited to do that. So going with the momentum is actually, it's actually a pretty good business tip. Um, going with it, not launching something in the depths of winter or like November where everyone's just shutting down and kind of wanting to just hide away, especially if it's a people facing thing. Launching something where people have to come to is actually pretty difficult. So it's just going with that momentum, and nature is a really good, I think, barometer of where to kind of start for that. And then you've also started your own podcast, and I want to talk about that as well because it is called Human.
Yes.
Firstly, I want to ask you, why is it called Human?
Well, my line about being human. How do we be human and become a human being and not a human doing? And it's born out of my own desire, really, to talk about these things, because for so long I was a human doing. And now I've realized how much fun it is to be a human being. I'm like, awesome, everyone needs to know about this. It's great. Well, what does that mean? And I've said in the podcast, exploring the rich simplicity of being yourself. We're back to the glass of water, the cup of tea, the sunlight on your skin, rich simplicity, because we've made life so complicated. And when we go back to basics and just think, the beautiful walk you went on, the color of the leaves, when we code in this behavior that we're looking for the positives, it might be absolutely pouring with rain. Let's just take a moment to look at those raindrops on the window. They're awesome. That's amazing. It's the rich simplicity of life. And of course, I've got some really lovely people to interview. I've got some method ambassadors, clients, sophrologists, and people that are really, really into some of these things, as well as that tech side. So, where's the data that tells us what our nervous system is doing, and what's the impact of that on our health and well-being? So, yeah, fascinating, Emily, and I'm having a wonderful time doing it. And it's obviously a delight to be here with you today as well.
But also, not only are you having lovely conversations, you're giving a few workshops on breath work, kind of breaking through into that in a bit more depth, leading people into how to do it, how to actually break that down into everyday life. And of course, I will link everything in the description for people to have a look through. But I was wondering if you could give a little teaser for people who are listening here, just how to implement that breath work and stillness in a few moments into their life today. What would you say?
So my absolute go-to, and I think it's currently on the one of the episodes, is sunshine breathing. When we become aware of the sun on our faces, and it might even be the light from a lamp, but we imagine it's the sun, and we begin to really think about how that makes us feel, and we begin to think about breathing in the energy of the sun, we get this incredible sensation that we can keep coming back to. So it's one of my favorite exercises. It's absolutely brilliant. It's sophrology 101, really. And it's transformational. I was standing in a queue for the airport the other day, and I was imagining I was doing my sunshine breathing, and my whole mood was lifted. So in line with the sad syndrome as well. Sun on your face, Emily, just imagining how you feel. And we're not all going on holiday now, but just going back to some of those memories is just a lovely, lovely way of being still, pausing, and experiencing some of those sophrology tools and techniques.
And then also the breathwork element as well. Feel that cold breath in and that warm
Mm.
breath out. And it's just that grounding, listening to your breathing, feeling your body go in and out, marvel at the existence that you're here in the ground. You can feel it, you can look up and see the sky and all of the little things, no matter where you are. If it's raining, like, do you know, that's that's another pretty cool thing to look at. It is those little things that just kind of ground us into being human. So what a lovely note to link it all together. And thank you, Lindsey, so much for coming and chatting us through what sophrology is and how we can actually break it down and implement it into our lives and try and understand a little bit more about who we are, why we're feeling what we're feeling, and how to perhaps ground ourselves in some simple steps that we can really apply pretty much immediately, which is one of my favorite things to do, because not only do we can delve into more information, of course, and resources like your podcast are really good to do so, but immediate things that we can just ground ourselves in a few moments to, which I think are really applicable to everyday life. So thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, Emily. It was lovely to chat to you.
And of course, I'll link your podcast in the description below so people can check that out and see what you're up to.
Amazing. Thank you so much.